We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane page. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. I am joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Jonny, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, I'm good. We spoke off air, didn't we, this week about how weird it is to not watch the Eagles on the weekend. I forget how much fun Red Zone is when the Eagles don't play at that time. Sometimes makes you wonder why we do this thing as fans, where we obsess over one team. But there we go. Yeah, it was actually quite enjoyable not to watch this team straight away and panic throughout Sunday and about what I'm going to talk about this week, and just enjoy some of the stupidity of other coaching staffs, which was nice, because I watched the Bills and Texans and I was realizing, other teams do dumb stuff too, because that was one of the weirdest ending of games I've ever seen. So it goes to show that it's maybe not just our own franchise that makes very silly decisions. But yeah, except for that, I am good.
I felt like it was a really good week of football too. Like, you had the overtime game on Thursday night, a drive into the red zone at the end of the game in the London game. You've got Bengals, Ravens in overtime. Like 3 of the 4 games went down to the wire in the afternoon. And then the night game obviously goes down to a 4th and goal. So I felt like it was a really enjoyable week of football. I don't know if it's because it was close games or, like you said, I didn't have to watch the Eagles, but we'll get into all that. We are also joined by a special guest. He is the godfather of Bleeding Green Nation. It's Brandon Lee Gowton. Go give him a follow on Twitter at Brandon Gowton. BLG, how are you doing today?
I definitely had a nice time not watching the Eagles this past weekend, especially coming off of that Buccaneers loss. I think a week off was needed. I am looking forward to this weekend and seeing them back in action. I hope I don't regret saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we've told you guys how much fun we had not watching the Eagles, stay tuned and listen to us talk about the Eagles and watch us talk about them. But we've got a comment coming in already from YouTube from Crabby Old Man. Says that looks like we've got a delay a game penalty already. We're starting the stream a little late. I'm going to throw my co-host under the bus on that one. I'm not going to fall on my sword. I'm not pulling a Nick Sirianni. It's all Johnny's fault. But we are going to dive in here. And what we're going to do today, we are each going to give you one reason for optimism, something positive that we've seen over the first 4 games for the Eagles, looking forward into the rest of the season. And then we're going to give you, we're not going to call it a negative because we're not negative people. We'll call it an area for improvement. And perhaps we'll even suggest how the Eagles could improve coming out of their bye week. But let's start off the podcast positive, because last week, Jonny and I were very negative on our film reviews. And let's get into our positive things. BLG, what is your reason for optimism for the Eagles moving forward this season?
So when I did my Eagles win-loss prediction back when the schedule came out, Johnny's favorite activity, famously, he loves making predictions. I did one of my own, and I had the Eagles finishing 13-4, which feels very optimistic. But part of that activity isn't just about how the feeling is about the Eagles as much as it is how you feel about the other teams. And I think if we are to take away something from the Eagles bye week too, and Jonny kind of mentioned it there, like, the Eagles have their issues, make no mistake. But guess what? A lot of teams are not great. There's a lot of teams that have their own issues, and it's not just a league full of juggernauts, and the Eagles are the only ones who can't do anything. And I think when you look at how this Eagles schedule is shaping up here, and I know this is dangerous because we all thought last year, late in the season, after the gauntlet, it would lighten up and they'd be able to beat some teams like the Cardinals at home and then the Giants in the regular season finale. And they didn't do that. So I am cautious about thinking that this is just going to be easy for the Eagles, because they don't make anything, or have not for some time, made things look easy. But I mean, coming out of the bye against a Browns team that looks absolutely dreadful, and that's arguably the worst quarterback in the NFL. And a Browns team playing their third straight road game, which is typically hard for teams to do and a challenge, mind you, against an Eagles team that's going to be coming off extra rest in the bye and players getting healthy, notably, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Lane Johnson, all expected back this week. And then really just so starting with that, and then if you can just kind of win that game, kind of get some wind in your sails, you have the next three, at the Giants, at the Bengals, who I actually think are better than that 1-4 record indicates, but still, they're a 1-4 team. And then versus the Jacksonville Jags on Sunday, Sunday Night Football, Doug Peterson, another return to Philly for him, assuming he's still the head coach at that point. I just think that's a real opportunity here for this team to kind of stabilize a bit. If you go 3-1 in that stretch, let's say they lose to the Bengals, you're 5-3 going into a big game against the Cowboys. Then if you can win that one, you're 6-3. You just beat the Cowboys. You're probably feeling pretty good going into that second half of the season. And famously, what can go wrong for the Eagles in the second half of a season after they start positively? I think the schedule provides some optimism here that they can kind of get the ball rolling a little bit.
Yeah, and you look at the schedule, and the Eagles have the number 30 strength of schedule remaining down the stretch. So only two teams have an easier schedule as of right now, based on opponent win percentage, than the Eagles. And I remember when we had you on our preseason podcast and we made our bold prediction, and we're like at the record point. My bold prediction called us to, I said they would lose their first two games and then they wouldn't lose again until December. And that's not exactly how it worked out, but they are 2-2. And that schedule I was looking at, the run of schedule to get to December, is still there. So, hopefully they're able to bounce back and come out of the bye week healthy and able to go on a bit of a run. Jonny, do you have any schedule thoughts? I know you love to talk about the schedule.
Yeah, we're not a preview pod at all, so I don't really like previewing games because I feel like the NFL is impossible to predict half the time. But it is worth pointing out that the Browns absolutely suck. Like, Deshaun Watson is not just a terrible person. It turns out he is a terrible, terrible quarterback as well. I'm convinced that there is something going on, like the owner is overruling them, because Winston should be starting. Mm-hmm. I think when I saw that they came out and said that Deshaun Watson was going to start, I got very happy. The only downside is, in some ways, it's like a weirdly easy game. Like, I think they're 8.5 point favorites. Like, if it doesn't go well, then it's complete meltdown. Like, this Browns team has been so inept, and I don't think it's because of injuries. I don't think they've got any players coming back. I mean, I think Nick Chubb is returning soon, but you're talking about like an older running back coming off a serious injury. If it doesn't go well, it's going to be, I do genuinely think it might be complete meltdown in Eagles land. So it's quite weird. Schedule is always hard to predict. I would just like to point out, in the Bleeding Green picks column this year, I'm second in total. So maybe picks are not something that I hate that much. Currently about 4 or 5 wins above BLG himself. Right. So I thought I'd throw that out there because last year I started hot and it all went horribly downhill. I think I'm terrible picking the Eagles this year as well, but I must admit I can't remember what I've actually picked with the Eagles. But yeah, schedule's a hard thing to predict, but BLG's right. They've got some of the big games out of the way, and they could not ask for a better team to go up against this week. But yeah, if it does go wrong, then the negativity is going to be off the scale.
I love how we bring BLG. We get BLG to grace our airwaves with his presence, and the first comment that Jonny makes is throwing his picks under the bus. That's just classic.
It was more of a compliment of myself rather than a put down of others, Shane. But I would just like to throw down 47-31 this year, and as BLG sort of referenced, I hate picking, and I've actually got them all in on time last year. I think last year I forgot to do 1 week, and then that killed me because I was way behind as well. So I'm determined this year to beat the Bleeding Green community in particular, because they absolutely hammered me last year.
You talk about picking Eagles games. I am 0-4 picking Eagles games this year.
Same.
On our weekly previews I do on Birds of the Round Table, I've picked all 4 games incorrectly. So I will be picking against the Eagles on that show every week for the rest of the season. All right, Jonny, let's throw it to you. What is your positive takeaway so far from the Eagles and optimistic looking forward?
Yeah, so in true style, I wanted to hit like 3 different things and try to combine them into one. So I've sort of taken a weird stance. I want to talk about the defense because there is no positivity there. And I think a lot of people have looked at the defensive front as a negative this year, and they'd be right to do so because it's been really poor. But when the Eagles have gone to their heavier fronts, they've been really successful. And I think that is worth pointing out. But like, if you're a defensive coaching staff and you spend the bye week studying the formula, like the formula is there for the Eagles. It's not like they need to do anything radically different. So my positive is basically when the Eagles have gone to 5-man and 6-man fronts this year, they've been really successful. And I really, really wanted to just do a whole point on Zach Bourne, but I feel like I'm going too big on Zach Bourne in articles of late, and I'm going big on my Bidding Green one this week again. So I don't want to just completely double down on the guy after 4 games. But I think Zach Bourne is basically the reason why they can play these 5-man fronts. So when they were brilliant against the Saints, it was a very specific game plan, but the Eagles did something that a lot of NFL teams are starting to do now. This hybrid, I know Cody Alexander from Match Quarters calls them literally hybrid linebackers. And he's written exclusively about Zach Bourne the last couple of weeks because he is like the poster child, shall we say, of this particular role. And it's where just before the snap, you bring a linebacker and put him at the edge, and it gives you a 5-man front. And there are so many benefits of this. If you're running the balls on offense, you then have to completely change who you're blocking. If it's gap scheme, you literally may have to change the individual you block. If you're throwing the football, the Eagles might be lined up in like a 4-2-5, let's say a nickel. That therefore offensive coordinators will have like coverage calls they will expect to see. And all of a sudden you can shift to a 5-1-5 and that changes things. When the Eagles have done this, I haven't crunched the numbers, but I know you did have the numbers when they ran it against the Saints, and it was incredibly successful. Shout out to @PhillyWannabeGM on Twitter, who me and him DM a lot about the Fangio defense. He went back the last 2 games and watched every time the Eagles had on 1st and 2nd down a 5-man front or a 6-man front, and they're giving up 1.27 yards per carry. And that's not in like one snap. That is on 15 different occasions. So I feel like the positive for the Eagles is that if they really want to fix the problems with the run defense, and I'm not going to get negative, but there are quite a few issues with the run fits. I don't think it's like, I keep seeing like maybe they need to add someone. I really don't think they do. My personal opinion is if you can't work out a run fit with Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Moro Jomo, Milton Williams as your 4 defensive tackles, then you're not good enough as a defensive coordinator because that should be good enough to stop the run on early downs. I think the interesting thing if they go more 5-man fronts is that I think we see more Brandon Graham and I think we see more Nolan Smith, because one of the things when you shift Zach Bourne to the edge is it obviously means that you have to kick the edge defender on that side into your interior position. And there is no way you can kick Bryce Huff inside. And I don't think you can kick Josh Sweat inside either. So whereas I think Brandon Graham can actually do that. So I think the benefit from this Eagles defense is although it's been really rough through 4 weeks, they have seen what's worked, and it may not work all the time, but the 5-man front has been really, really successful. And we mentioned this last week, Shane, but people always assume that when you run the 5-man front, it sort of kills your pass coverage, and it obviously makes a difference. You're literally losing a second-level defender, but you can just rush 5, and you can figure out ways behind it. I don't think it's like the absolute killer that people make it out like it is. So I think my positive for the Eagles would be, although they haven't done it often enough, when they have done it, it's been really successful. And the fact that they've got something that has worked this year, I would be stunned if Fangio does not take a really long, hard look in the bye week at probably every single running play the Eagles have faced. And if he sees the same things that the stats suggest, like 1.2 yards per carry in early downs, I think that is something people are going to lean into more for the second half of the season. So I will go with the Eagles' use of 5- and 6-man fronts over the past 2 weeks in particular.
Yeah, it's something that was certainly very, very effective against the Saints. Obviously, the Saints are like the only team in the NFL that just pretty much refuses to run 11 personnel, which makes them a great matchup for the Eagles. So hopefully they figure out how to do that against 11 personnel, because that does present a unique challenge. BLG, any thoughts on the Eagles' 5-man fronts and the usage of Zach Bond so far?
Yeah, I think the Saints ranked like 30th in 11 personnel or whatever it was going into that game.
32nd, actually.
Okay, they're dead last.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that was kind of like, the weird thing coming out of that game. It's like, okay, but what about the personnel package that most teams run? And you kind of need to have an answer against. So, yeah, very interested to see how that goes against these other teams.
Can I also ask you, BLG, and Shane, of course. I'm not going to ignore Shane, but I'll go BLG first. I'm on the Zach Bourne contract extension sooner rather than later. Am
Mhm.
I completely absurd, or as someone who obviously writes daily about the Eagles, is that something that you've ever heard you think would make sense? Because I'm guessing you could still get him pretty cheap. And I feel like even if you don't keep Fangio around in the offseason, who knows?
Mhm.
He feels like a pretty versatile defender that's already proven in a short space. Am I going mad? Is it too early to talk about extension? Or what do you think?
I don't think from the team standpoint that there's I think they would be buying low. You know, the reason for Zach Bond's side might be like, well, hey, I like how I'm playing, and maybe I just kind of want to wait this out and see what I could get if I hit the open market. You know, as this like new thing, like he hit the market last year as this backup rotational edge guy, whatever. As if he hits the market after this offseason, he could be like, wow, you know, his agent is selling him more as this very versatile kind of piece. So maybe, you know, if there's any delay, I think it would be on his end.
Yeah, I'm very much in favor of the Eagles getting something done with Zach Bond. I'm not sure what it would look like because, like BLG mentioned, Zach Bond might want to play this out a little bit more and prove that value some more. Let's go to a couple comments here. We got Phil chiming in from Twitter, asks if Robert Saleh could help. I believe I saw that Robert Saleh said he's going to take the rest of the year off. But I mean, sure, there's like 28 teams in the NFL that would benefit from having Robert Saleh in the building. Pretty much everybody except the Vikings, Texans, and Buccaneers. We've got Crabby Old Man chiming in again, says the Eagles will need a whole stretch of get right games. Eagles Eric says the biggest benefit of the hybrid linebacker is taking Avonte Maddox off the field, which apparently there's some reporting out now that the Eagles are preparing to move to Cooper DeJean coming out of the bye, although they, I believe, dismissed that. So I guess we'll see on that. And one more here. Zach Bond has a very unique skill set and has been our best player throughout the first 4 games on defense. If he'll sign, we should do it ASAP. I don't know about the best player, but he's certainly exceeded my expectations. Okay, final positive, and then we can get into being negative.
Yeah,
let's get it. My reason for optimism is the response to the blitz so far this season. Now, that may sound crazy to say, coming off of the game that we saw before the bye, where the Eagles got absolutely wrecked by Tampa Bay. I think it's important to contextualize that. Again, you're missing A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, 2 guys he's very comfortable throwing the football to. You're missing your right tackle, and Fred Johnson kind of had a disaster game. But if you actually go look at the performance against the Buccaneers in week 4 versus the 2 performances against the Buccaneers last season, the regular season and the playoffs, Hurts actually had a slightly better performance. And we're not going for slightly better, but if you look at the first 3 games, if you just look at the season as a whole, including that Tampa Bay game, Hurts ranks 6th in the NFL in EPA per dropback when he's blitzed. His EPA is up like 0.3 of a point. His time to throw is down. His pressure rate is down. His tight window throw percentage is down. The average separation of receivers he's targeting is up. His deep throw percentage is down. And so to me, one of the biggest question marks coming into the season was, can they beat the blitz? Are they going to figure out how to do that? And for 3 weeks, it looked like definitely yes. And then you hit the perfect storm of probably the second best blitz designer in the NFL and Todd Bowles in a game where you were tremendously shorthanded and it looked like it all fell apart. I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt that it was more tied to injuries than it was that the first 3 weeks were an aberration. So I've been pleased with what we've seen in the answers to the blitz. I've been pleased, and tying into that is the offensive line. You replace Jason Kelce and you put in a new right guard, and you wonder how that's all going to play out. And that's looked fine. Calling protections at the line has looked fine to me. So that's a big positive for me. And if they can continue to build on that, I think it'll pay off, should they meet the Buccaneers later on in the playoffs.
I'm impressed that you managed to do my thing, Shane, of getting 2 points at once. So in my article this week, and we haven't spoken about this, but I've chosen 3 positives and 3 things to improve. So a little bit more detailed in the podcast, because obviously I've got time to write. And I put dealing with the blitz as 1, and I mentioned a lot of the numbers that you said as well. I think the biggest benefit is, as someone who watched a lot of Kellen Moore's offense, what the Eagles are doing now is exactly what I expected them to do. Like in every Kellen Moore game I watched, there was nothing radical about how he attacked the blitz. He didn't see it as a chance to make a big play. He basically just saw it as pick up the blitz and check it down and then hope your guy breaks a tackle, which may sound very basic, but in some way you limit the mistakes you can make. Like you see a lot of 5-6 yard check downs to tight ends, and then you essentially hope that he can go and make a play after the catch. And if he doesn't, it ends up being a short game. But if he does, you can end up making a big play that way. And the other thing I had, Shane, was my second point, was actually the play of the offensive line, and in particular the backups on the offensive line. I think people just take for granted that like we don't really talk about Jason Kelce much, which is sort of absurd because he was incredibly good for a long time. And I've always wondered, and this is a weird thing to say, and it's probably quite controversial, but whether maybe Kelce did too much in blitz protection. There was quite a lot of clips going around on New Heights of him like analyzing what went wrong on a certain play. And I wonder if at some point, as a quarterback who gets paid a serious amount of money, you want a little bit more of a say. And I wonder if there's a bit more of like a combination of Juergens and Hurts and Kellen Moore, rather than relying on one individual. And that's not to put any blame on Kelce. It's the opposite. In fact, it speaks to how good he was, the fact that the Eagles trusted him that much. But this year, they have definitely been better. I even wrote in the article that I'm willing to write off week 4 because I think they just got in such a horrible situation down any good starting wide receivers and problems on the offensive line. I think Juergens wasn't even there at the end. And then Todd Bowles is just teeing off with absolutely no need to care about the run at that stage. So that's not really like what I care about. Through the first 3 weeks, the Eagles definitely look better against the blitz. So I agree with you. That was one of my positives as well. And in fact, if you didn't text me earlier on saying that was your positive, that was going to be my big one as well. So you stole it away from me at the end.
I have 2 points on what Jonny said there. Number one, I know Hurts kind of talked about being like stunted. I think he used the word stunted when it came to some things with the, pre-snap, the relationship between him and the center. And I don't think that, he wasn't trying to slam Jason Kelce, just like Jonny wasn't there, but kind of talking about, I think, how Hurts having more ownership of that is, giving him, it was stunting to have such a good player there and for him to not as be involved with it when Jason Kelce was there. So I think that's definitely a legitimate point that Jalen's even talked about. And then for the Bucks game, another thing like we can add in here is like the defense being as bad as it was put so much pressure on the offense from a great game script perspective. And obviously the offense not doing their part either, contributing to that. But if this team could actually maybe like start not slow for once, maybe score a point in the first quarter for the first time in 7 games now would be, I think that could just go a long way towards how the other team then has to play you. If they just could dictate the game script a little more, I think that would be nice.
Yeah, for sure. And Jonny, you said that you were impressed with my ability to squeeze 2 points into one. Wait till we get to the room for improvement. I might squeeze like 3 into one there. But let's go ahead and flip the script here and let's talk about our areas for improvement. And so, BLG, I'll leave it to you here first. And we'll give you a place that we think the Eagles need to grow. Maybe we'll talk about how they can accomplish that. But BLG, what do the Eagles need to improve on coming out of their bye week?
It is the lowest hanging fruit, but like you just can't get by the big issue with the quarterback. Ultimately, big picture, and we can go through like you guys do and be like, well, that one actually wasn't his fault, or well, like, you can parse that on a turnover by turnover level. But when you zoom out and you look at 27 turnovers in his last 22 games, I don't care who's to blame, and it's hard for me to blame. It's hard for anyone to believe that like, oh, that's just pure bad luck. There's been some bad luck mixed in there, sure. But when you have that many turnovers over this span of time, dating back to the beginning of the 2023 season, and the fact that he leads the NFL in turnover-worthy play percentage defined by Pro Football Focus this year, like it has to stop. It has to stop. I don't know about you guys, but at this point, I go into every game just kind of waiting for the turnover to happen because it continues to happen. And I think even one of the games he didn't have a turnover in recently, that Bucks playoff game, he kind of still did when he took that safety, like not officially a turnover. So like you can even add another one in there if you want. Like the turnovers have to stop. And I think turnovers alone aren't the worst thing from a standpoint of like if you're gonna be risky and aggressive, sometimes there's times to do that. And if the cost is going to be turning the ball over on maybe an arm punt like down the field, then yeah, you live with that. But that has not been the kind of turnovers we're seeing here, and they keep happening in the like very critical high leverage spots. This can't happen. Like it's not really like great analysis to be like, stop turning the ball over. But like, actually, please, really, you have to stop turning the ball over. Nick Sirianni likes to say that, like, the team that makes the fewest mistakes wins. Like, the Eagles are always making more mistakes. And if you're looking for a way to come up with how the Eagles could possibly lose to this terrible Browns team, it would be because Jalen continues to turn the ball over and gives the Browns extra chances and gives the game away. So it just has to stop. I don't have the answer to what is the singular problem, and I don't think it's as simple as waving a magical wand. But like, it just can't continue to this rate. It can't. It just simply cannot.
Yeah, you mentioned he leads the league in turnover-worthy plays right now. It's crazy that he was each of the last 2 years, he had 12 and 16 turnover-worthy plays. This year, he's on track for 47.
So bad.
A player hasn't had 40 turnover-worthy plays in a season since 2019, which was Jameis Winston's epic 5,000-yard, 33 touchdown, but also 30 interceptions, but also 48 sacks season. So last year, he was really high in turnovers, but he was like bottom 5 or 6, if I recall correctly, in turnover-worthy play rate. Mm-hmm. This year, the turnover-worthy play rate has skyrocketed. And Josh Allen is typically up there too. Josh Allen makes a lot of big-time throws. Jalen Hurts is only 21st in big-time throw rate, which is tied with Patrick Mahomes, but Patrick Mahomes doesn't have the turnover-worthy plays. So certainly you can parse them out as to whose fault they are, and I've done that, and Johnny's done that because we're film nerds and it's what we do. But at the end of the day, good teams don't turn the ball over as much as the Eagles have, and it's a huge area that they need to grow in. Johnny, thoughts on the Eagles' turnovers?
Yeah, BRG, you're going to laugh when you read my article this week and post it, because I basically quote what you just said. I literally started off, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I started off by just saying, well, this is pretty obvious, but I would be foolish not to mention it. And I said, you can talk about all your fancy schematic changes in the world, but it simply doesn't matter if you turn the ball over frequently. And that's the truth. There are some numbers out there. I know Dennis Salzman, who does a great job, posted that the Eagles are 6th in series conversion rate, basically meaning that they move the ball very well. But the turnovers kill them. The reason why they haven't scored many points this year is because they turn the ball over. And I said in the article, you can't look anywhere other than Jalen Hurts. As you mentioned, he's ranking ridiculously high with 11 turnover-worthy plays, but also a turnover-worthy play percentage of 6.7. The only guys ahead of him this year are Tyler Huntley and Anthony Richardson, who are not players that are paid anywhere near as much as Jalen Hurts. But they're sort of like a combination, isn't it? I posted the exact picture or the one where Devontae Smith fell over, and I argued that wasn't his fault. And I even said in the article, it's worth noting that sometimes he has a bit of bad luck. But what quarterback doesn't have bad luck? The stats point that he is simply throwing too many risky passes. I would say there's a combination of maybe being over-aggressive, and maybe the Eagles coaching staff needs to rein it in on 3rd and long. And the funny thing is I used to really, really go to bat for Jalen Hurts, and my sort of big thing about him was he's mobile and he doesn't turn the ball over. And if you do those two things, you don't need to be a brilliant passer to have a really good offense. But at the moment, he's not really excelling in either of those areas. In particular, the turnovers are something that I don't think he's good enough to overcompensate. Josh Allen is good enough to overcompensate it, because when he's on, he's unbelievably good. I don't think Jalen Hurts will ever be anywhere near that level of passer. So he quite simply cannot turn the ball over. He's been too risky. He's been too over-aggressive at times. And then I even quoted you, Brandon, as you just said about Nick Sirianni. He talks all the time about fundamentals. Well, the fumble we had against the Saints was a real disaster. That was just a pure lack of fundamentals. It was, you could say it was a bit fluky. The guy sort of dived and hit the ball. But if he's holding the ball properly as he's running out the pocket, that simply doesn't happen. So I think it's not just a player issue, it's also a coaching issue. Whoever's coaching Jalen needs to be harsher on him in practice. They need to make sure that they're using drills that train this kind of stuff, because that's not a good look for the team in general. But you said it correctly, Brandon. We can sit here in our fancy scheme nerds and we can talk about our wonderful plays, but football's a simple sport, and I don't care how good your scheme is, how good your players are. If you lose a turnover battle, 12 times in a row, you will not be a good football team. It is basically impossible to be a successful winning franchise consistently losing the turnover battle.
Yeah, and again, like I think Shane, he talked about it with like these lower turnover worthy, play rates in the past, and even dating back to training camp this year. Like everyone made a lot. He didn't throw an interception to the final day, but it wasn't even just about that to me. Like I was saying, he wasn't really putting the ball in harm's way at all. Like those interceptions, it wasn't just like, oh, he had a bunch of dropped picks. No, like he was not. So it's so weird to go from that in training camp, where he's taking really good care of the football, to go to what we've seen this season. And again, in the high leverage moments too. And I guess part of that speaks to like, him needing to be better with maybe game situation understanding. Like maybe now is not the time to get aggressive when I'm in the red zone, and we maybe could actually just use some points here if it's not going to work out. And obviously I'm generally in favor of being aggressive, but there could be a time where, like, okay, the throw's not just there. I have to take the sack. I have to take the check down, whatever. We kick a field goal here instead of just getting 0. So I think he has it in him to be more careful with the ball based on what we've seen in the past. But it's just like getting harder and harder to believe that with this sample size increasing every single week.
Yeah, I think sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy too. It's like, you've turned the ball over and now you're behind. So now you feel like you have to make up for it to make an even better play. And that makes you more likely to get a turnover, and you get into these, negative feedback loops, and it can be hard to break out of. And so hopefully the bye week does that for them. And they can sort of get going, because right now they rank 30th in the NFL in turnover differential, which is definitely not the place that you want to be. So, okay. Jonny, give me your area of improvement for the Eagles moving forward.
Yeah, I went back and forth on whether to go with defense, but I went with the offense this week. And I guess I've got a combination. It's a bit of a weird one because the Eagles are running the ball very well. Saquon Barkley is arguably the best running back in the league this year. And I think the running game in general has been quite fun to watch. But every week there's been something that has been bugging me about it. And I'm going to talk about 2 things, I guess, and they're both linked to the run game. The first one, well, actually, I'm going to do 3 things, but they're I guess 2 of them are very simple. Sorry, I'm not combining as always. First one is very simple.
Why don't you just read your whole article to us, Jonny?
Yeah, I will do. Quote for quote. So here we go. No, first one is very simple. Run the ball. If I can get that sign, who were the fans outside the Eagles Stadium once? Just run the damn ball, whatever they said. If we can get those guys on the podcast, they can do point 1, because it is literally just run it more. Like, I don't want to sound like basic run the ball guy, but please be run the ball guy. The second thing is I want to see more designed runs for Jalen Hurts. So I think Jalen is not someone that's good going laterally at the moment, but I still think when you see a designed run, he sort of comes alive. This is maybe a controversial, take, but I'm sort of done hiding Jalen Hurts in the run game in case he gets injured, because I don't see the point of having Jalen Hurts as your quarterback if he's not a great running threat. He will never be an elite pocket passer, like ever. I think you look at someone like what Jaden Daniels is doing, you look at what Lamar Jackson's done. Being a mobile quarterback makes it easier for you as a passer, because you basically don't need to be exceptionally good as a passer, because you can pick up yardage easily with the run game. And also you get more predictable coverages because defenses are more scared about you taking off. If Jalen Hurts is not a real running threat, I don't think this offense goes that far this year. And I don't mean like RPOs and read options when he keeps it. I mean like he is the running back on the play. Like you go empty and run QB draw, or you go empty and run QB power. You run QB counter bash. You run like proper designed gap scheme concepts with Jalen as the designed ball carrier. And I'm not saying 25 a game because they got Saquon Barkley, but I think you need to give him 5 or 6 at least, and that will also help open up the offense. But my big one is Shane, and we spoke about this a lot, is I watched a lot of Kellen Moore, and Kellen Moore is an outside zone guy. Like, Kellen Moore's offense is basically a lot more Shanahan-y than people realize. There's a ton of outside zone from under center. If you go back and look at his numbers from outside under center, they are huge. And what that does, as everyone knows, is it opens up the play action rollout game. And people think it's really simple football sometimes, but it is. If you can coach outside zone well, and then you can start running play action bootlegs off it, it's really hard to stop. I was looking up some stats on this, and I came across Arjun Menon, who I believe now works for an NFL team. I should check that. I'm not sure he went to the Jets. Yeah, he did, didn't he?
Yeah, because he shut down his scout site that I used to.
Yes, he did. Well, he tweeted in January this year, basically saying that going back to 2018 on early downs, running play action from under center is the most efficient play call you can make in every single measure of efficiency in terms of EPA per dropback, success rate, yards per dropback. And this was in response to a Greg Olsen tweet, when Greg Olsen tweeted saying under center play action is the single best way to pass on early downs in the NFL. Play action from the gun just isn't as effective. Marrying run and pass looks is the key. It's not about how well or often you run. Well, the Eagles can't run from under center, and the Eagles haven't been able to run from under center for years. And Jeff Stoutland is the best run game guy in the league, but it's fair to point out that his offensive lines don't seem to be able to block from under center consistently. And it makes you wonder whether they just don't rep it a lot at all, because there's no reason why the guys they have should not be able to do it. So I guess my point is, number one, they need to start running from under center. But number two, if they can't run from under center, there's a little cheat code. They can start running from the pistol more. And my answer would be, let's blend the two. If we can't run from under center, let's go to the pistol more. They had one run against the Saints that, of course, I noticed, but it wasn't a very fancy run. It was about an 8-yard gain, but it was outside zone from the pistol. And the second I saw that, I thought, that's good, because what that can do is you can still run your sort of rollouts, your bootlegs. They're not as good as under center, but they're still very, very useful, and it almost looks identical. So whatever happens, whether the Eagles can't block from under center, whether Jalen Hurts doesn't want to go under center, obviously you can't just run every time you go under center, which is something the Eagles do at the moment as well. Every time they go under center, it's going to be a run. Like, it's so predictable, and it was last year as well. So trying to figure out a couple of basic passing concepts they can run from under center as well, even if Jalen doesn't like it. But I just don't think, when you look at the numbers and you look at the best offenses in the leagues, the McVays, the Shanahans, etc., they run a lot of under center and they run a lot of play action, and it's really hard to stop. And when you hear stats guys, and the Eagles are an analytical organization, saying that basically that is the most efficient passing play you could do based on any metric, and it's not even in the Eagles playbook, and the Eagles offensive coordinator has made a living out of running that play, you worry a little bit about not just whose offense this is, but also what Jalen can and what Jalen can't do. So if the Eagles don't want to go under center, not every quarterback can. Some quarterbacks don't like it. That is a problem, but you can sort of live with that as long as you use the pistol more. So I really want to see some outside zone under center pistol, and then I would love some play action off of that. So that'll be my really big improvement the Eagles run game could make.
The median amount of rushing yards from under center among NFL teams is 247 yards. Do either of you want to take a guess how many rushing yards? This is excluding QB sneaks, by the way. Does anybody want to take a guess how many rushing yards the Eagles have from under center this season?
Like 0 negative yards.
Negative?
0.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
0.
Yeah.
Second worst is the Colts with 101. So, like, it's not
That's
close.
nuts.
It's not like, oh, there's other teams that also just don't run under center. The Eagles have 12 rushing attempts for 0 yards from under center.
Not
And
only
the
is that
second worst has 101 yards.
Not only is that insane, it's even more insane when they hired a guy who does this a lot. Like, if they just said, we're going to be a shotgun run-based team, and went out and hired like a shotgun offense coordinator who lives in the shotgun, then I would say, okay, then they've committed to it. But they went out and got a guy who lived under center. That stat is extraordinary.
Well, what does that say? Yeah,
that's a problem. And it makes you question everything about who's running the offense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that is a hell of a stat, Shane. So did you have a second team of 103?
101.
101. Yeah, that's
the
outrageous.
difference in EPA per rushing attempt between the Eagles at negative 0.53 and the second worst team at 0.31 is the same as the difference between number 2 and number 30.
Oh my goodness.
So there you go. There's some fun stats for you.
Yeah, that's depressing.
Also, you mentioned outside zone. The Eagles have the second lowest number of outside zone attempts in the league, but they have the 7th highest EPA per attempt on those plays. So fix the problem. Hire Jonny as the run game coordinator. We got this.
Yeah, or don't hire a guy who lives in outside zone to run the offense if you don't want to run it. Like, yeah, I'm a Kellen Moore guy, but that's worrying because that is a huge part of his offense.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's dive into my room for improvement, and I'm going to try to do this quickly, but it's very broad. My area of improvement is just the defensive philosophy. Here's the thing. You cannot, play light personnel, nickel personnel, with light edge rushers while also playing 4-man fronts out of light boxes and expect to stop the run. You just can't do it. And the Eagles can't do it. They're 27th in rushing DVOA this season. And so when you do that, now all of a sudden your linebackers have to overcommit. Your safeties have to overcommit to the run, which leaves holes all over the middle of the field. And you see that anytime somebody dials up a play action pass against the Eagles. In addition to that, it's become a topic of conversation. The Eagles give so much cushion to opposing receivers, and they do it while they're playing split field safety looks pre-snap. Like, why do you need to play 12 yards off of Mike Evans with Darius Slay if you have a safety over the top? The Eagles have had 0 players in press coverage on 85% of their snaps this season, which is the largest rate in the league. Jonny talked about after the Saints game, or no, it was after the Bucks game, all the missed tackles. And he said he doesn't care about missed tackles. The real issue is the scheme. When you've got guys in space and they've got all those room, you would expect a receiver to make a cornerback miss when he's got 8 yards to work with. And the Eagles allow 12.2 yards after the catch per reception, which is the 3rd worst mark in the league. And they do all of this. They play light boxes, safeties over the top, a lot of cushion, and they are still slightly below average in explosive pass plays allowed. So part of it's poor tackling. There's a lot of things, but it's all related together. It's this insistence in playing light boxes, this insistence in backing off of the line of scrimmage while also keeping guys deep over the top. It causes so many issues for the defense underneath. I looked up numbers for separation, just talking about press coverage, next gen stats charts, wide receivers cushion numbers. That is on plays where you were targeted. What was the distance between you and the nearest defender at the snap of the ball? And I looked it up week by week. In week 4, Sterling Shepard and Mike Evans ranked 4th and 13th among receivers. The week before, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, 13th and 25th. The week before that, Drake London 1st, Ray McLeod 6th, Darnell Mooney 12th. Then week 1, it was Romeo Doubs 7th, Christian Watson 11th, and Jaden Reed 14th. If you look at it over the first 5 weeks of the season, those receivers, overall, the Eagles have given 19.3% more cushion at the snap than the rest of the league has done when they play these players. The guy that they gave the least cushion to was Rashid Shaheed, and he had 0 catches on 5 targets, while otherwise averaging 85 yards and 5 catches per game. Like, I'm not saying that press coverage is the answer. I don't think you're going to see that. Darius Slay's not been much of a press coverage corner in his career. Quinyon Mitchell didn't press much in college. He's an off coverage corner, but you can still tighten things up. You can still get a safety into the box. You could do the 5-man fronts that Jonny mentioned. And so I guess overall, this is my elevator pitch to Vic Fangio to fix the defense. Just man up and play defense. Stop with we're going to put 2 safeties 30 yards off the ball. I'm not the guy that screams run the ball and play cover 0, but it's time to go a little bit back in the old school direction and get up and challenge receivers, get up into the box and challenge an offense to do something different, because what they're doing now is not only not working, it's not even preventing explosive plays. And so that's my little rant, I guess, on the Eagles defense and some of the things I would do to fix it. BLG, thoughts about that?
I guess from like a bigger picture level, like what does the Eagles defense do well? You know, like what do you think? What do you think is their strength, or like should be their strength? I think that's like the question. Also, kind of the team is struggling with a little bit. Like when we talk about identity, like what do you do well? Like lean into that thing, and I feel like that's kind of a tough answer for the defense right now. So yeah, I think everything should be on the table. My real answer, which is a fake answer, but I'm going to say my real answer. Just bring back the defensive coordinator that the Eagles are going to face this week. I don't think he got enough credit here, and I like that guy. He was pretty good, but can't really do that.
Also, it's worth pointing out that like a lot of people's answer online is play press man coverage. The Eagles rank last in the NFL in success rate when they play man coverage. So now a lot of that is because they're trying to disguise blitzes, and you end up with Darius Slay playing outside leverage in a cover 1 blitz 10 yards off of a receiver in a condensed set, and that's never going to work. Or it's from trying to disguise things, and you end up with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson isolated on Chris Olave in the slot. So stop trying to be tricky. Like, just there's got to be a middle line. It irritated me to no end with Jim Schwartz that this is what we're going to do. And if you can stop it, it doesn't matter because we're just going to do it anyways. And we're not even going to try to hide it. And with Vic Fangio, it's like, you have no idea what we're going to do. But what we do know is that it won't work. So let's stop trying to disguise things so much. Let's just find that middle ground. Just get Vic and Jim Schwartz in a room this weekend and just like merge them into one person and bring them to Philadelphia, and the defense will be amazing.
Boom.
Jonny, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's the best quote. What was it? You don't know what I'm doing, but whatever it will, it won't work. That's my favorite Vic Fangio quote, I think, ever. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head at the end there. I think from a like big picture, BLG's right. The Eagles defense doesn't really do anything well, and I think it might be time. And I'm hoping in this bye week they really do have a hard look at themselves, because Fangio is obviously a very good coach. Like, there's still a lot of Fangio stuff being run around the league. It's not like Fangio can't play and that as a coordinator he can't coach. I think the biggest problem is, and you hit it at the head there, Shane, is that he's obsessed with disguise. And it might just be that the Eagles aren't good enough to run disguise like he wants to. And maybe he needs to simplify it. And it doesn't mean he has to start playing cover one press man. You can still play like the same coverages. Number one, you just maybe don't disguise it as much, so players are already lined up pre-snap. And then secondly, the cornerbacks just take 4 yards or take 5 steps further forward. You don't need to suddenly be out-and-out press coverage on every snap. Quinion Mitchell just doesn't need to be 12 yards deep. He can be 6 yards deep, 5 yards deep. And I must admit, I hated Vic Fangio's answer about that when he put the blame on the players as if like they choose their alignments. And I'm like, you're a coach and it's a rookie cornerback. If you don't like his alignment, tell him to change it. Tell your defensive back coach to scream at him pre-snap to go up. Like, players will always play safety first to an extent, no matter who you are, because cornerbacks don't want to get beat deep. If you gave every corner the chance, I'm sure a lot of them would rather sit back and just give up basic stuff and let other guys rally to the tackle. Like, it's your job as a coach to tell them to be brave and to tell them where to play. So I think you're right. I think philosophically it's just all wrong. And my only hope is that they've got some smart guys in the building and that Fangio's done this a while and his defenses historically get better. So my hope is that they take a really hard look at themselves over this bye week and come back with like a different approach to defense to an extent. It's not going to all radically change. We don't need to radically change anyway. The coverages can stay the same. You can still do similar stuff. You just tweak it here and there. And in general, the philosophic, the like identity needs to change, where they're not just reacting to what the offense does. They are starting to dictate what happens to the offense as well. Because right now, watching Brian Flores' defense at the weekend was like, oh my goodness, this is like a different sport, because they're trying to catch the offense out, whereas it feels like the Eagles defense is just basically going on what the other team is doing, and they're very, very reactive, very passive, and also just quite frankly boring to watch and not very likable, because you'd rather get beat deep occasionally but also make some great plays, and they're not really doing anything well. So yeah, it's a good one to end on. It's basically just get better, Vic Fangio. Nice easy one for the Eagles to fix.
Yeah, so to recap, change how you play defense, change how you run the ball, and change how you throw the ball, and you should be good to go.
Don't turn the ball over. Play good defense, play good offense. Problem solved.
Yeah. Follow us for more tips on how to coach football.
I do think sometimes things are simpler than, coaches make them out to be. Obviously, we're being kind of maybe extreme here, but I mean, sometimes people do overcomplicate it.
Sure. BLG, I need you to get in a room with Vic Fangio and drop that quote on him for us and see how let me know how that goes. All right.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd love that.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this. But I don't know if I call this the bye week episode, because last week was the bye. For us film guys, this is the bye week episode. So BLG, thanks for joining us. Always good to hop on a podcast with you and get a chance to chat. Tell the people where they can find your stuff and what you've got going on.
Yeah, one last point on Jalen Hurts, too. I meant to say this earlier. Like, Jalen Hurts doesn't need to be the superhero that, like, the Chiefs need Patrick Mahomes and the Bills need Josh Allen to be. Not to say there isn't a time and place for him to make some plays. Obviously, there will be. But, like, part of the turnover thing is, like, hey, maybe just, like, be the point guard and, like, lean on your really good players and just don't kind of overdo it. All right. That's it on that point. You can find me on Twitter at Brandon Gowton, Instagram, same thing. Threads, Blue Sky, anything at Brandon Gowton, and then the website to check out where you can check out my work and Jonny Page's work, most importantly, bleedinggreennation.com.
All right. BLG, thanks for joining us. You guys don't need me to tell you to go follow BLG and read his work, but go do it anyways. At Brandon Gowton on Twitter, bleedinggreennation.com for all the stuff. You can follow Jonny and I on Twitter. He is at Jonny Page 9. I'm at Shane Half NFL, and we will catch you guys next week breaking down an Eagles victory, hopefully, over the Cleveland Browns.
Thank you.